without further ado, I'm going to ask you to give a welcome to our first speaker, Brian Gerrish, and the title of his talk is Money, the Fuel of Fraud and Corruption.
Okay. Brilliant. Here we go. Okay, good afternoon. Can everybody hear me with this mic on? People in the corners, very important people for me. Okay, well, it's fantastic to see so many of you here today, and thank you all very much for coming. Somebody told me they'd come down from Derby. I think that may be a bit further than Plymouth. Anybody beat Derby?
Vienna.
Vienna. Okay. Anything up on Vienna? Okay. Yes? Australia. For this event today. The answer to that is yes for the cameras. Okay, thanks very much. Well done. Okay, now Ian said that he was going to be exceptionally strict on time, and I've been guilty of overrunning before, and I've only got an hour, so I'm going to have to go pretty quickly with this presentation. I decided to go for fraud and corruption because it's really where my journey started in Plymouth. When I was learning about what was happening in the city, I started to discover that very strange things were going on with public money. We're going back to sort of about 1997, 98. And shortly after that, we got to the stage of producing a little news sheet called the Devonport Column. It was only printed one A4 sheet, printed both sides. But that was enough to get more people coming to talk to us about what was actually going on in Plymouth and where public money was going, and if you put your hand up and said something's wrong, you got bullied. That was really the start of the story. So this presentation enabled me to go back and visit some of the things that I'd looked at some time ago, but now, of course, with hindsight, I can put them into a different context. So I hope you'll find that my presentation is a useful introduction to what's going on. And then we've got some very experienced speakers going to be talking about the high-level money business, what's really going on amongst the big bankers. Okay, now, we've got a couple of minutes for a little experiment with you. First of all, soften you up. So we've printed quite a lot in the UK column on a number of topics, and we are saying at the moment nobody else is printing what we're printing. We know that we're read by the Cabinet Office. We know David Cameron dislikes us intensely. And we know that other MPs go and read the Cabbage Patch column, which is the section on the back. So if you haven't seen the column before, we do still have back issues in Plymouth. If you call us, contact us, and we'll see what we can do for you. Okay, so a little bit of an experiment. Have you all got some money in your pockets? You have. I hope so. Coin will do, or a note. Okay. Now, the first thing is, where did the money come from? I'm not going to spend long on this. Where did that money come from? Out of thin air. Out of thin air. That's the only reply I need. Somebody somewhere made it. Okay, it was minted out of metal, or it was printed on paper. But essentially, somebody created it out of thin air, and then it appears in your pocket after it's gone through banks, of course. So it's a pretty basic concept. So if you reach into your pocket and get out a coin or a note, you've got to be quick about this because I'm short of time. Trust me, that's what the bankers say. Now, I know it's after lunch, and I know Ian's given me the first slot because it's my job to try and get some action out of you. Okay, so has everybody got a coin or a note in their hand? You sure? All right. Now, I want you to hold it quite tightly. Right. Can anybody feel pain? Is it hurting anybody? Anybody got any irritation or itching or... So, there's no pain? Anybody got pain from holding that money? So what I'm trying to say to you is the money itself is not dangerous. The money doesn't hurt. You've got it in your hand. It's not hurting you. So what I'd like you to do now is to be benevolent. I want you to give the person on your left the money that you've got. And when you give it to them in your mind, Ah. It's all right. Okay. Shh. We haven't got a lot of time, okay? I've got to be ruthless. You'll get your money back, but I want you to give the money to the person on your left. Right, okay, bit of hush, because I'm watching very carefully and I know what's going on. All the people who only pulled out 10p because they're cautious are happy, and the people who had a tenner in their hand have now got nervous, right? So now what we're learning is that the use of money is based on trust. If you trust the other person, the money works. If you don't trust them, the money doesn't work. Okay? Now, you've loaned that money as a gesture of goodwill at the moment, and because you're nice people. And that works, because you've loaned that money, the person could use it, and then they're going to give it back to you. So that's very nice. We've just issued money as credit. Now I want you to put your banker hat on, and you're going to say to the person next to you, left, that you've given the money to, when you give me my money back, I'm going to need an extra £5 on top for loaning you the money, all right? And you know what's going to happen, because they're going to get stroppy. And what I've just demonstrated is basically loaning money out with interest, which is what the banks are doing with money that's created from nothing. I couldn't do it in a simpler way. So have you all got that? So the money is not the problem. I'm giving a talk which is about money, the fuel of fraud and corruption, but it's not the money. It's the gesture, it's the intent, it's the use of it. You better give the money back, otherwise we're going to have a punch-up. I was actually going to say, when it had been passed on once, would you pass it on again? But I knew that would really frighten you. Okay, so you're going to remember that. Now then, I'm going to take you on a little journey through what I know is going on in this country. And we're going to look at fraud and corruption. And I've used the word fuel. Now, I've also wanted to use a simple analogy. This is not NLP, by the way, before somebody starts. This is just about giving you a little idea to make the subject a bit simpler. But fuel, is water a fuel? Could be. Good answer. I'll leave it there. So I've said, yeah, water's a fuel. Now, if we think about fraud and corruption, the key thing to say is it only a little drip? Have we only got a bit of fraud and corruption in this country? Well, the thing about having a leak in your ceiling or a drip of water onto your ceiling, which I'm sure some of you have experienced, is it doesn't take much dripping steadily before there's a smell. And if you leave it long enough, that mold grows into something that's pretty unpleasant, a really bad smell, and then it destroys the plaster, and then your nice home starts to be less nice. And I'm going to say to you, I think fraud and corruption's the same. There's always going to be a bit in society, but if it gets dealt with reasonably quickly, then we're on a winner. But if it gets left, your ceiling gets trashed. Now, when that drip starts to increase a bit, then it starts to give you a real problem, because now we're into the fact that the whole house is being damaged. And I'm looking at our house being Britain at the moment. That's where we live. That's our home. So this lady's got a problem because that water is now spreading and the volume's increasing and she can't cope with it, and it's damaging the house. Exactly the same with fraud and corruption. And then, of course, when it really gets going, the next thing we find is it gets deeper and it gets murkier and it gets more dangerous, because you get involved in some of this corruption and you're going to drown in it. You're going to drown in it. The fuel isn't really dangerous. It's when it gets going that it becomes dangerous. And if we really let it get going, then it starts to really impact on communities. And it isn't one person who's going to drown in it. It's going to be a lot of people. So there we have a bit of flooded Britain. I should know where that is, but I've forgotten. But it doesn't matter. It looks a bit like Britain. But what is really going on in this country is not like that. It's this. Because that is the figure of fraud and corruption, financial crimes in Britain. The figure is £35.5 billion per year. And you will not hear that figure from anybody else. If you want to check up that it's correct, you will need to go and dig into the Home Office, CBI and Federation of Small Businesses. The reason I know this figure is correct is the man who put it together for me is a time-served fraudster. And at the time he went into prison, he'd committed one of the biggest frauds in this country, which was worth about 50 million. I'm going to say he's now working on the good side, and he's also advising some MPs about fraud and corruption in this country. Because at the moment, white-collar financial crimes, I'm wearing a blue shirt if you're worried about it today, is absolutely massive. That's what you're talking about, a third, roughly, of the NHS budget disappearing into people's pockets. This is massive. And I like this slide. It's an old one, but it's the best I can do to say that we're in deep doo-doo. For those whose eyesight is as good or as poor as mine, there's a fox in the middle of the pack there somewhere. Okay, so one of the key things is to say, what does fraud and corruption look like? And I picked a couple of images here that have come out in the papers. We've got the MPs. Well, MPs don't get involved in fraud and corruption. It's called fiddling. It's called oversights. It's called a mistake. So if you're an MP or a member of the House of Lords, it seems to me you can break the law simply by choosing to ignore what is theft. And we have allowed our MPs to get away effectively with murder over the subject of the expenses, because if it had been a mother on benefits who had diddled the state for £45, she would have been in prison, and some of them are. Whose fault is it that the politicians can do this? It's our fault, because we've never held them to account. So, I don't know whether this is going to work on here, but down at the bottom we've got benefit fraudster. But I look at George Osborne, and George Osborne is not telling us the truth, that the national debt is a fiction which is created out of money created out of nothing by international banks. It is a fraud, and he is perpetuating that fraud. So is it the people at the bottom who are the most dangerous, or is it the people at the top? I think it's the people at the top. Now, can I prove that I know a little bit about this subject? Well, I can, because this is really where I started. So we go back to Plymouth. We're back into the late 90s, and there was a massive fraud perpetuated in Plymouth around an MOD property called Fort Bovisand. Now, this is very spectacular. It's an old, I'm going to forget the name now. It'll come to me. I'll say Napoleonic. That might not be quite right. But basically, it was a fort that's always had a diving school there, and for many, many years, it had an extremely good reputation for training divers. And then something unpleasant happened, and a team moved in that was criminal, that was corrupt. And this is a summary of what went on in that place. Companies were acquired under value, huge trading losses up to $500,000. Further Education Funding Council was providing money for youngsters to train as divers. They were diddled out of about $1.5 million. They were repressurising divers with a bends, that's hyperbaric treatment. And the NHS was getting charged for fictitious treatment of people with the bends. And not only that, there was no insurance in place to protect any of the people who were going through the divers school anyway. The police carried out a parallel operation into some of the people running this complex fraud called Operation Reproof. They spent $4 million, and at the end of it, they never arrested anybody and nobody went to court. And basically, the whole time that this scam was going on, the mod property was not maintained, so it was deteriorating. And what we were left with is a fraud of a minimum of £23 million. The police never fully investigated. even though they used a man who was an expert in what he was looking at because of his past criminal activity, he was a specialist in fraud, the police bullied him into helping them, and he gave them 2,500 hours of his expert time, and when he'd finished his work, the police refused to pay him. And that's still the state today. So the crime never fully investigated, public money of at least 23 million missing. Devon and Cornwall police have not done their duty. Fraud and corruption. Then there was another little company called the Devonport Regeneration Company. Now in the Labour era, Mr. Blair, the New Deal programme for communities was to try and help very deprived communities and get them back up working to regenerate them. And a lot of money appeared through New Deal. Plymouth was one of the areas that got 49 million. And I can tell you that that 49 million pounds was never properly accounted for. The regeneration company was a limited company. It did trade, but unlike ordinary people who have to have counts for Companies House, there were no proper accounts kept. And what was going on was a blurring of money through the Devonport Regeneration Company and Plymouth City Council. So the council was siphoning off money for regeneration into other pots. And I know very well what happens when you actually flag this up. You get threatened. Now, this regeneration scam went on in many other places. It went on in Manchester, it went on in Sheffield, it went on in Glasgow. Everywhere this money appeared, the fraud and corruption came with it because there were no proper checks and balances. And this is where I'm pushing at you that the money is the fuel of fraud and corruption. If you're handling it properly, you're checking, you've got accountability, you're okay. But if you're not, it doesn't work. And the insidious thing about this money is Devon and Cornwall police were also feeding at the trough. So eventually, when a local councillor went to the police with irrefutable evidence of what was going on, they simply said, we're not investigating. They didn't want to because they had between 500,000 and 1 million out of the funds themselves. When people at local meetings started to ask the right questions, where's the accounts? At one meeting where there was probably 30 people, most of them over 70, we had 13 police officers in the room in all the black gear. And one of the locals after this meeting produced this brilliant cartoon taking the mickey out of the police because they were basically bullying elderly people. If anybody's a policeman or woman in the audience, I recognise that not all police are bad. In fact, I'm being helped by some very good ones. However, when the seeds of fraud and corruption get into an organisation, just like the mould on your ceiling, it's beginning to do damage. He knew I'd mention it, and I do a couple of times. So I have mentioned common purpose, but what I'm interested in here is here's another regeneration company. These were also set up with government grants all over the country. Common purpose people were brought in alongside the programme, and I'm going to say in these single regeneration budget systems, there was massive fraud and corruption. How do I know? Because people across the country contacted me. Let's go in a different direction. Yep, here's the MPs, and they were using our money to buy very attractive duck, what do I call it? Summer house for ducks. I'm not sure what it is, but we get the idea. And toilet seats. I didn't try the video attached to that on the BBC site, but what they were pointing out was MPs were abusing their expenses by buying trivial items. When I was a naval officer, if I had fiddled my travel expenses by 10 pence, that was an unbelievably serious offence. If I fiddled my travel expenses by £10, I would have been court-martialed. I would have been court-martialed. And I have watched these MPs get away with criminal activity. It is astounding, and we need to put a stop to it. It's fraud. The papers were reporting on a company called A4E. I'm just showing you this to see that we're seeing the same things out there. Now, I've read recently that the Audit Commission has recently found that there's no wrongdoing in A4E, and I'm a bit puzzled because the police had arrested 9 people, and I haven't seen what the results of those arrests are, but I'm getting the impression we're about to see a whitewash job done on this company because this company is too close to the corrupt people in government. And then we've got this lady. Do we all know about her? Tied up with the whole thing, really. Also, deputy chairman of the Tory party. But she's made a mistake over letting her London home. She's capable of running the country, but she's not capable of running her own finances. It's a bit of a conundrum, isn't it, really? Okay? But what the papers are not doing is using the right words. If the papers started to label fraud and corruption, we might start to see some movement. This is another way we can go with fraud and corruption. Because at the moment, we have a minimum of 20 billion a year industry with the state taking children. I'd like to ask a question. How many people in this room have been inside a family court? Okay, so there's a few of us. And what I'd like to say is, unless you have been inside a family court, you have no concept of what fraud and corruption is like. When the judge tells you, when you produce evidence that perjury is committed, oh, Mr. Gerrish, it's a mistake. That's what was said to me inside a family court. Mr. Gerrish, it was a mistake. When you've seen documents falsified, when you've heard expert witnesses lie on oath, and that continues and the child is taken away, it is so unbelievably breathtaking, you have to experience it. How can you experience it? Only by helping a family and going to court with them, because the public eye is banned. Why? Because it's a £20 billion industry to take children. A friend of mine in Northern Ireland who called me during the week said to me, Brian, it's 38,000. And I said, what is? And he said, that's the going rate for an attractive child in Northern Ireland. Once you pay your 38,000, you do what you like with them. This stuff is real. The courts are feeding off this, as I'll show you in a minute. It's real. This is fraud and corruption. This is the tsunami. This is starting to kill people. I know I'm the man who always goes in on the heavy stuff, but we have to deal with it. And the little note at the bottom, that is a witness statement that went into a court. It just says, I love you, Mum. All I want to do is come home. And that was the only note a little 11-year-old girl could smuggle out, and she has never been returned home. This is what is going on. And these are the people doing it, because this is the Family and Children's Minister, Sarah Tether. And in her duties and responsibility, she is responsible for commissioning and market development of children's services. They've made it a commercial game. Yeah, they are taking children away because people can make money. And when I asked her for a full definition of these responsibilities in a Freedom of Information request, she didn't want to answer. So her own material said that this was one of her duties, commissioning and market development of children's services. When I said, can you broaden that out for me? Very polite email, I don't get a reply, even though I've chased. Why? Because they are stealing children. Now, here's a man who's done tremendous things. Ian Puddick, a London plumber who has to suffer the embarrassment of discovering his wife was having an affair. He found a pretty explicit photo on her phone, and that led him on a trail where he came up against some of the biggest and most powerful companies in the city. As a result of him simply trying to get his wife moved to a different department, what happened was a huge police operation against him. which smashed into his home, into his accountant's office, and into his businesses. The cost of the operation was over £1 million. Why? Because he sent 2 perfectly polite emails, but he'd upset some powerful people. In the trial, this is public record, in the trial, the judge said, I am stunned at seeing this level of corruption, because a private company called Kroll was able to put such pressure on the London police that they put a minimum of 25 anti-terrorist policemen on the street to try and crush this man. And what is interesting about Kroll is that one of the key people in Kroll was a certain gentleman called Bill Bratton, who was the man that Cameron wanted to have as the head of London police. This is corruption on an unbelievable scale. And when you know where to look for the evidence, it's right in front of our eyes. It's like the flood. When your feet are wet, you know what's going on. So what we've got to do is help other people to see what's happening. And this is how Ian did it when the Police Federation had their big demo and they were marching up in London. Ian went along in the front with his banner. And he said that 99% of the police were very good, would talk to him, but there were a few unpleasant, thuggish ones. But this corruption is real. They're going for the schools. Academy schools are about handing our children's education over to commercial entities who are in it for profit. There's no ifs and buts, and if they take over the schools, public assets are being given directly into the hands of profit-making people. Not only that, after the first year, those private companies are able to put together, determine the whole school curriculum. They decide what children are going to be taught. Now, the BBC, I had to say to somebody in the room, it doesn't apply to all people that work in the BBC, but we've got so interested with the fact that the BBC doesn't report real news anymore that the UK column has informed the BBC we are making a documentary on them. My goodness, you should have seen it. The man was wobbling. What's the documentary about? Who have you interviewed? I mean, what sort of things are you going to cover? And we said, well, the usual things, how much money you've got, why you're not reporting the real news, what you're doing privately. It was incredible. He wouldn't give us his surname, but you could hear that man wobbling and shaking on the phone. Why? We're a little paper. But we thought we'd take a look into the BBC. So here it is. This is BBC Worldwide. Do you all know what it is? It's the private arm of the BBC. This is a £1.1 billion company. And it is there because it's been created out of taxpayers' money. Now, it boasts that it puts 160, 180 million pounds back into the BBC, but nevertheless, it's run off licence payers' money, our money. So if we have a quick look at what they talk about, and I've got to go really quickly because of the time, so it will be on the video, but their vision is to be a global entertainment company rooted in BBC values. Oh, that's reassuring. Yeah? Rooted in BBC values. It boasts about the money, getting 181 million back. Haven't we done well? And then you look at the executives, and you see that the chief executive, John Smith, earns $440,000 a year, as you do. And then he's going to get a 55% bonus. And then he's allowed to use the BBC Pensions Fund. Guess who's paid for that? Now, if you think this is a good idea and you'd like to tune into that BBC World information, you can't, because you're a licence payer. It's only available to people in other parts of the world. Nice. So if we then look at the way the BBC treats people who've got to pay the licence fee, and it's the bit in blue, it says household growth is low compared to the long-run trend experienced until 2008, and customers find it increasingly hard to pay as household budgets are squeezed by prices, increasing faster than incomes. In this environment, the BBC has improved its processes to maintain evasion at 5.2%. What they mean is they've put the screws on people. So the BBC must be one of the best lying, corrupt organisations in this country, because while they are taking the money and not reporting the true news, they have pushed it sideways to start a global company which is dealing in profits and paying shareholders. Part of it's coming back to the BBC. Climate change. It wasn't just that the university was exposed, it was the fact that the university had lied in providing false data with their whole operation funded out of the public purse. So the University of East Anglia, it wasn't as simple as one or two men fiddling the truth, because what they did is used public money to fiddle the truth. That's misfeasance in public office, or malfeasance, criminal offence. This is fraud and corruption. Well, here's Prince Andrew. I don't know what he's doing today, whether he's paddling one of the boats or not. I warned him a few weeks ago that he was going to visit a school where there were serious allegations of abuse. That was Oxford and Cherwell Valley College in Oxford. Serious allegations of sexual abuse, bullying, racism. And I sent an email to Buckingham Palace, and I know it got through to him. But he still made the visit. And now we have Italians and Swiss investigators looking into how he managed to sell his massive house for $3 million over the asking price. Now, I wouldn't be silly enough to stay here and say this is fraud and corruption, but I can ask, is it fraud and corruption? Because what we're looking at in this huge wave that's coming across the country is the wave reaches to the top levels. I'm not saying this man has done anything wrong. I'll repeat that. I'm not saying this man has done anything wrong. But I'm interested in the fact we have a student loans company that boasts that it's collected 1.3 billion from our young people that it's supposed to be helping educate. So he's talking about his customer base and collecting. What's really happened is these young students have been locked into this fraudulent international banking debt before they've even left school. Whose fault is it? It's ours. I did it. I signed the form. I'm getting interested though. I signed the form at a time when my children were under 18. Therefore, I don't believe the contract stands. But we'll think about that. And then there's this man, and I'm interested in Google because, of course, Google is tightly connected with the Conservatives. It's connected with the leadership team, and David Cameron has got one of the executives who was godmother of his late child. So very close connections, but Google says this. It says that although they take $10 billion a quarter, their accounting is so poor that they don't know how much money they make out of porn. I think somebody's telling a porky pie. And I think they don't want to switch the porn off because the porn is helping the fraud and corruption. And these people are not close to government, they're integral with it, they're part of it. So here we have them. Murdoch. And this lady was called a witch in Private Eye and a few other places. I watched her when she was filmed after she came out of the police station, and she didn't know whether to laugh or cry. And a lot of people were really going for Rebecca. And I'm perhaps going to surprise you because I'm going to say, I think she needs some support. Why do I think that? Because I think she's being made a scapegoat, whilst the real criminals have been in the background. These are the people who've still not been brought to account. They won't be brought to account by Leveson because he's simply a tool. But the whole time the press can't get at the truth, the only thing left to do it is either the Truth Movement or the UK column or Alex Jones. But the key to it is we've got to get the focus on the fraud and corruption. Clegg's in there as well. It's very difficult to tell Clegg apart from David Cameron. Mike did a good job of merging them together. But if you ask me who I think is the most dangerous out of Cameron and Clegg, the answer for me is Clegg, because he's the man in the background. He's the man you don't really see. I don't think Cameron can read as well, which is a bit of a disadvantage for him. Now, what's going to happen here? So if you think about taking them to court, you've got a problem. A little film clip, we had to put subtitles in because the audio's not too good, but I think you'll find it interesting.
No, because I don't, we have to venue for them.
Court, right.
The problem is,
Right.
they come and use our court space because they pay for all these warrants. So they book our court
They
space.
pay you for the warrants?
Yeah, yeah.
Right,
we
okay.
pay, they pay us to use the court space, really.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
It's a bit like what the council do.
Yeah.
Same thing.
Yeah.
So basically, they come in and hire them.
Yeah. In a way.
Right. Oh, in a way,
And use
yeah.
it as a venue.
And use it as a venue.
Yeah,
Right.
and then...
Right, that's it. That's the woman in the court saying that when the electricity company comes to chase you and they're going to break into your house and they want to put in a smart meter, okay, they have hired the court, they've paid for the court, they've paid for the magistrate to sit in the court. And then the man says, oh, just like the council does, because the gentleman who did that little video was the man who discovered that when the people who hadn't paid their council tax in Plymouth, there were 2,400 of them on one day. The council simply paid for the court and the magistrate, rubber stamped the court orders. So on a single day, Plymouth City Council invented out of nothing around about £60,000. Fraud. The court is not a court of law, it's a court of business where money changes hands. So I've told you about the family courts. This is where you go for this is where you go for a parking fine or something like that. You think you're going into a court. No, you're not. You're going into something where the court has already been hired and the judge or the magistrate has already been hired and paid for. It's fraud. I've always been interested in funny little charities that seem to spring up doing things. Groundwork is across the UK. I got interested in it again because it went bust in Plymouth. And they brought in receivers. And I'm very interested in this because they were working with the Department of Work and Pensions, trying to help people get into work. But of course, there isn't any work, so it's really a fraudulent loop. But the interesting thing is, it is a criminal act to run any form of charity whilst it is insolvent. There's no ifs or buts. If in your books it shows that you were taking money as a charity while you were insolvent, that's criminal. And here is a charity which is a quasi-public body charity thing, and now it's suddenly gone into receivership. These organisations are all over the country. Right, into the heavy stuff. In the early days, I got interested in this flow of money coming into Cornwall. And one of the biggest ones was Objective One, which was 320 million, which came into Cornwall. It was going to do everything. It was going to transform Cornwall into Silicon Valley. It was going to make Cornwall the greatest food producer in the world. It was going to help the fishing stocks. It was going to do everything. The trouble was, after a few years, nobody really knew where the money had gone. So that 320 million came in with no proper accounting controls. And my challenge still stands, can anybody get me a full set of the audited accounts? Because I don't think they exist. Why do you push money into an area with no proper audit or accountancy procedures? Because people get greedy. They feed off it. And then the fraud and corruption starts, and then you're hooked. And then you can be bought. So I started to get interested in the idea that on one hand, the government says there's no money, and on the other hand, huge sums of money were pushed into very poor areas with no controls. Along with this came the rise of the Quangos, the regional development agencies. Have you all heard of those? Now, the Tories have boasted that they've got rid of them. Well, they haven't really, because there's plenty of other quangos doing the same job. But just to give you an example of the power of these things when they were going, the South West of England Regional Development Agency was the one that handled the 320 million in Cornwall. But the South East of England Development Agency, CEDA, just to show you, handled a budget of 1.9 billion. On their board, nobody was democratically elected. They were all appointees. So they were unaccountable to the public. And yet they were handling 1.9 billion, sorry. Now, Objective 1, with the help of the South West of England Regional Development Agency, boasted that it was going to produce a film studio costing 5.7 million. It was going to create 200 jobs, and it was going to be state-of-art film and technology in Europe. Only problem was, one day somebody went to visit it, and they found it wasn't really there. All the money had been taken, but there was no proper film studio. So guess what happened? There was a police investigation, and guess what happened? Nothing. So this money simply disappeared. If you go on the internet and look at images for the Southwest Film Studios, you will see some steel structure, and you'll see one of these boards from the hoardings lying in the dirt. I haven't manufactured this. This is an actual photograph. These false projects expanded all over the UK in the last 10, 15 years. There were going to be swimming pools built. There was going to be an earth centre on an old colliery. They all had to have the ring of stars. They all got people excited. Everybody went to the European funding pot, and they were then hooked. These are some of the other European funding streams that have been used to suborn us, drag us in. The European Regional Development Fund. If you look around as you're driving, you'll see these little flag signs. And the European Social Fund. And look at what they're talking about, convergence for economic transformation. Well, it seems to me that the economies have been transformed in Europe, all right? And if we had locked ourselves in, they would have transformed our economy. Because what they were deliberately doing was smashing the economies, because they then can take the assets, as Greece is finding, and Ireland is going to find out shortly. Lots of glossy literature is a clue to what these people are up to. For those of you who are interested in sort of semi-occult stuff, there is some very strange imagery in some of this, but I'm not going to make too heavy of it today. But these were huge streams of money coming into communities, often with great unemployment, drug use, no hope for children, and basically the money started to feed the corruption. And here's a big one. And this goes right into the heart of when I started to look at the world and say something's wrong. The New Millennium Experience Company. In the press at the time, and as the contract ran, and questions were asked in the House, massive fraud about the £800 million this project swallowed up. I believe Mr. Heseltine was involved. Lord Faulkner certainly was, because he was the single shareholder. In Parliament, an MP asked questions about 450 million of secret contracts, fraud and corruption on a massive scale. Who went to prison? Nobody. Might have been an advantage having Lord Faulkner on your side, I don't know. Now, the Millennium experience is interesting, because when you looked at who was behind the Dome, the Millennium Experience Programme, surprise, surprise, you found it connected back to common purpose. Now, I'm not going to talk about common purpose, because you can see other talks on it. What I will say is everywhere we find common purpose, we often find fraud and corruption, and I'm not joking. So here's a connection between the Millennium Experience Programme and Citizens Connection. What does the lottery do? Well, they do a lot of things. Huge pot of money, and everybody's told they fund good things. So this is a film company called First Light, and this is one of their films. It's a cartoon. The cartoon is about a dog committing suicide. And First Light's boast is that this film was made by 13 and 14-year-olds. If you go on their website and have a look at some of their vicious, nasty, dirty little films, you will find there's one called The Gravestone Girl, which is a horror film made by even younger children. This is what our money is really being used for. And we are now starting to discover some things in South Wales which are truly horrific, because we are now finding links between media and the suicides amongst the young people. This is an example. It's a poster that went up on a small parish hall. Rudry is a tiny village. Everything's sort of closed down, the garage, the post office. The village hall was there, but suddenly it got a grant of £600,000 from the Welsh Assembly. A tiny village hall gets a grant of £600,000. Then they start putting on media programs for children. Now, you can't see it properly in this thing, but the boy's face is graffitied out. That wasn't somebody damaging the poster, because in his hand he's got the chalk. That's self-mutilation. If the quality of the picture was bigger, you'd be able to see this little boy has wet himself. This is really perverted, nasty stuff. Our money is being used for it, and in my view, it's corruption. There are a lot of charities that don't know whether they're businesses. So this is Tomorrow's People. Again, I'm not saying this gentleman has done anything wrong. What I'm saying is, here's a charity that's about helping people, I don't think. But when you read how it describes it says it is a commercial and business-like charity. Well, is it charity or isn't it a charity? That's the question. This is a really bad slide, but I put it up because this is some of my early notes where I was trying to work out what was going on in the country. And the Millennium Dome was one of the key starting points. So I'll help you a bit. Top right-hand corner, got to do this very quickly. I started to see money coming out of what was a corrupt project and heading in the direction of common purpose, down here at the bottom, down here. And these are all the common purpose courses where we were seeing council officials, police officers, NHS people. And below it, we were starting to see a nest of funny little companies, Zebra Collective. And they were receiving public money, and it was like there was an infestation of funny little companies all feeding off public money. Think of the mold growing on the ceiling. These little companies growing because they were feeding off money, but their purpose was not good. I discovered very weird organizations all saying that life was going to be better in the future. Tomorrow's People, 2020 vision. And when you followed them back, you came back to organizations like the Industrial Society and Demos. I can't give you a lecture on Demos, I'd like to, but if you research it, Demos is Marxist. It has always been Marxist, and Julia Middleton from Common Purpose, surprise to surprise, is historically connected. So imagine the mold growing in the dark. If you shut your house up, it's a bit damp, it's dark, that mold gets going pretty quickly. When you lift the stone, you see it, and we can do something about it. So this was me starting to put a picture together, and down the centre was another area of government that I was only beginning to understand. I knew about Parliament, I knew about parish councillors because I'd been one, but here we'd got another style of government. So this is in a different diagrammatic form, but here we've got all of these government units. I was looking at the ODPM, but now it's called the Department for Communities and Local Government. But it was the money coming into that which helped the fraud and corruption spread. I've used this slide before, but this is what we think we live in. We think these are the people guiding us when they're not boating on the Thames. But what's at work, and we only need to follow the money, is thousands of organisations. Thousands of them. Yeah? You need to research them. I can tell you about some, but if you don't know who the Bilderbergers are, if you don't know who the Council for Foreign Relations is, if you don't know who the Royal Institute of International Affairs is, or the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, you are not seeing who's really controlling your money. So these new people have done a lot of damage. But how the scam has been worked is that in the middle of society, they've created, it's like a cuckoo in the nest. They've created this new sector. And the third sector has got more government departments than you can shake a stick at. If you go back to the 50s, we were a happy nation. We could do a lot. We had a huge manufacturing base. We certainly didn't have 1,300 government departments. Why do we have them now? This is an important one. 170,000 charities worth 44 billion. This is not charity, it's an industry. And these charities are now being used to give opinion in government. So when you see that NSPCC is being consulted on something, or Bernardo's, right, they are using them as stakeholders. And this is New World Order government. The other thing that both Labour and Conservatives are now doing is creating community activists. They're doing it now because they've let the contracts to start training their people to get into this nest to change the way we are. So the think tanks produce all of the information and the strategy. It's pumped into the centre. It's then put back into Parliament, and then it drops on us. This is the way this corrupt system works. Now link over the top of it a group of people who've been trained to believe they are future leaders. This is getting serious. And then you label it, because this is what Cameron is calling it, the big society. It's very dangerous. Where's the money come from? Now, there are better speakers than me for this issue, but I wanted to mention George Soros. If you go and look at his website, he's pumping $1.9 billion into change agent networks. And of course, he went to the London School of Economics, and he's the man that produced Black Wednesday when the run on the pound made him billions. And yet we see Robert Peston of the BBC, well, I wanted to use an expression which I shouldn't. He was cuddling him nearly. And Cameron is there at his begging bowl. So these are the people at the top of the fraud and corruption tree. A bit of history on him. This is one of his websites where down the right, if you can see that there, it's talking about areas of the world where he's running these innovation initiatives. So when we know where to look at these people, if we follow the money, we can see the people really doing the damage. And then we come to this type of person. I couldn't get a slide big enough. This is Eric Pickles. Okay? Eric Pickles is the man who's bringing in big society. This man, in my opinion, is dangerous. He is a domestic terrorist because he is destroying this country from within by helping this fraud and corruption grow within the third sector. How are they doing it? They're taking other people's money. They've decided to lift 400 million, which they say has been left in people's bank accounts. Well, who's given them permission to take that money? Nobody. They've just lifted it to help fund big society. And I think I know why they do this. Why do they siphon money from the Millennium Project? Why do they take it out of these bank accounts? Because what they're doing is criminal. And if they started to take the money directly from the public purse, we would know what they're doing. So what they do is they launder the money. They clean it by pushing it through charities and other organizations. This is what big society says it is. It's to bring decision-making to local people. No, it's not. Big society is to bring state control to the lowest possible level. You will not run a flower club without the permission of big society. You will not run a youth football team without permission of big society. And the government's own documentation, and you can read it in the paper, says this is based on Saul Alinsky. And Saul Alinsky was a revolutionary who said the way to bring down Western democracies is to subvert them from within. Read his book. We have done an article in the UK column in which we have proven, because we're referring to the government's own literature, that this man, Saul Alinsky, is the driving ideology behind the big society. And if you don't want that as proof, go and have a look at Third Sector magazine, where you will find that a £15 million contract has just been let with a funny little company come charity thingy quango in order to put Saul Alinsky's ideas into place. That's why they need the community activists. The community activists go on a training course. Any guesses? They go on a training course and they're trained for 2 days before they are told if they're accepted full time. And I'll tell you what they're doing with them. They're NLPing them. Let's take this man who's now head of the civil service. You're going to enjoy this. Bob Kerslake. He comes out of Sheffield and suddenly he's in charge of everybody in the public sector. Let's look at his history. This is a real text sent to the Serious Fraud Office. The chief executive of Sheffield City Council of the time, Robert Kerslake, directed the then district auditor, Sue Sunderland, that her investigation would not find any corruption within the council. Why did he say that? Because the corruption in Sheffield Council was huge. It was millions, and it was connected with European money. And even when OLAF, which is the European anti-fraud outfit, was brought in, and a gentleman called Neil Kinnock, nothing happened. In fact, the man who exposed this multi-million-pound fraud in Sheffield, a very brave man, they broke his marriage up. A house was set on fire. We think they got the wrong house, but they tried to section him. I'm brave enough to put this material up because the man who's provided me with the evidence, we've got the lot. We have the documents showing what was going on in Sheffield, and Kerslake was the chief executive at the time. It is no surprise to me this man has been promoted to the highest level of government to control the public sector. And it was known to us, but it was not known to other people at the time, that both Kerslake and the lady in the auditor's department were both common purpose trained. And I regard that as being very significant. So the man now running our civil service has been involved with fraud. We printed that there was that Sheffield City Council's accounts, 1.8 billion, had effectively been frozen due to fraud and corruption to do with common purpose invoices. We printed that. No other national paper would take the story even when they were given the evidence. The BBC did not print it. These are the government departments that these people are now manipulating. And here is a government department running a nasty little thing called CoLab, which is going to train people in social services. I don't get a warm feeling. I think we've got about 5 minutes to go. Somebody's hovering. So if I come back to the early days, the UK column has consistently exposed what's been going on. And we've been warning people using particular terminology. We've been talking about criminal activity. We've been talking about subversion. We've been talking about fraud and corruption. So here's Francis Maude, who said the Tory party was to be made transparent, whiter than white, and yet we could show that in his dealings with common purpose, they were prepared to lie, because in the first response to the public, it just said that training the top 200 civil servants, they were going to look at a common purpose model. when actually what took place is that the chairman of Common Purpose, David Bell, was there in the meeting when they decided they were going to use Common Purpose. And he was going to look at costs. That's insider dealing. That is insider dealing. We know the brainwashing is going on.
I'm going to do that very uncool TED thing of saying, this is really exciting for me to do this. You don't often hear that at the beginning of TED videos, but I think you should a bit more. So I'm going to talk to you about some of the work that we do. My name's Dominic Campbell. I run a small firm called FutureGov, and I'm lucky enough to work with a small gang of cool people who are really interested in how we can use technology and the web to transform government and politics. This is my personal story. This is where I started 9 years ago. Very, very classic local government story. That's Barnet Town Hall in North London. Doesn't look like the hotbed of innovation and disruption. So this is also me. The other side of my life is my web obsession, and in particular Twitter. And those two, the last two slides, are really the foundation of my career and the foundation of FutureGov, and also me being lucky enough to be part of this movement that's now often called Gov 2.0, Government 2.0, building on how do you transform the web, government using Web 2.0 technologies. So Twitter has been pretty fundamental to why I'm here tonight in so many ways, which I can't really go into because there's so many of them, but it's fascinating just from a personal journey how disruptive to my life this disruptive technology has been to actually take me out of being in the back office of a town hall in North London to suddenly being here 3 years later is phenomenal. What is the kind of culture that we're all striving for? What is the new world that we're pushing for? So I think that we're at a point now where you're either with us or you're against us. Or are we actually going to transform government into something entirely different? I think the really crucial thing is that we're pushing from two sides. So on the one hand, we need to be disrupting from the inside of government. Disrupting from the inside of government. Disrupting from the inside of government. They're the ones who are creating parallel structures. Carrie Bishop, who I'm honoured to work with, who's a great colleague, she talks about parallel structures where you're not destroying the system with this technology, you're just creating an entirely new system. Just using the web to create new structures for yourself. So normally where there's bright colours and shiny logos like these, you've normally stumbled into a place where social innovators are trying to do something new and creative and interesting. And all I will say to finish is just to encourage you to join us now as a militant optimist, get on the web, get creative and get going. So thank you very much.
The man talks about creating a parallel system of government, and he says we've got to be using change agents. We've got to be on the inside. We've got to be collaborating. This is common purpose, which is unlawful. Now, I've put this paper up because on the front, we've come back to Mr. David Bell, who's at the centre, and of course, he's one of the kingpins in the Leveson inquiry. The Leveson inquiry is a puppet show to ensure the press is controlled so the press can't show the fraud and corruption. Liberty, so if I come back, the lady on the left here is Chakrabarti. She's also a common purpose devotee. Here she is. But in the background, she works for an organisation that took money from Gaddafi. It's amazing, isn't it, when you just put it all together? And also, sorry, I have to come through that. And also, in the early days, Liberty was backing pro-paedophile campaigns. Staggering. And these people are now on the board, which is supposedly looking at the press. 400,000 gone in Suffolk over NLP training, and the finance officer hung himself. And this one, I want to get up. I've only got 2 more slides in, bear with me. We've got Eilish Angelini, and the Scottish judiciary, or the Scottish legal system, has spent over £500,000 persecuting a man who dared to stand up and warn that paedophile activity was going on around Holly Gregg. They found £500,000 to put him in prison to shut him up, but they couldn't find that money to investigate. Dirty hands. We have consistently talked about the banking collapse. How do you engineer a banking collapse? Fraud and corruption. What can we do to stop it? This is the key bit. We've got to get rid of these people. And of course, I mean that in the nicest, cuddly way. We have to get rid of them, and we have to do it pretty quickly. And the start to this procedure is exposure. And we've also got to take away control of the nation's money supply from the international banks, which are corrupt and criminal. And we've got to start producing our own money. And that is what the Greenback Pound initiative is about, which we talk about in the paper. It's time for another talk on that. And the lawful bank, it is possible for us to start issuing our own money as credit. And if we do it, we will completely undermine the international banks. It is lawful to do it. So this is where we are. We've got Big Eric Pickles giving a lot of leverage, and we've got a lot of people on our side. But we have to make the decision as to what we're going to do. Either we tackle the fraud and corruption and we get back into some form of decent democracy, or we let Fat Pickles take the seesaw down, and we are going to be in something very unpleasant. The good news is people are waking up. This is what we need: courage. The moment you get out there doing stuff, you feel better, and other people start to wake up. Thank you.